coming on, if you know how to and you are willing, put your name and your church name in the chat. My name is Jenny Whitford. I work at Worthington Presbyterian, and I am the director for Children's Ministries. I also serve on the C&O committee. I'm a certified educator.
You're gonna have to change your clothes.
I'm a certified educator in the Presbyterian Church. Katie is our tech guru today. She is also part of the C&O committee, and I'll let her introduce herself.
Hi, I am Reverend Katie Kinnison. Right now I'm doing transitional ministry work with the wonderful people of First Presbyterian in Washington Courthouse. I too am on, as Jenny said, the Commission for Nurture and Outreach, working particularly with Matthew 25 things and also vital congregations. We have been officially deemed a vital congregations presbytery. We were accepted into the next batch. So I'm going to be one of the facilitators with that, along with Reverend Amy House. We are so excited. There's going to be tons of new stuff coming at you for that.
Super. And also with us today is Michael Wilkos. He is Senior Vice President at United Way Columbus. Yes. And so as we are all connected with one another in one way or the other, I have dogs in the background here. As we are connected with one another, we have a church member named Nancy Case in our church, and she knows Michael through her work at Columbus State, and she shared him with us, and he spoke to Worthington. And I said to the Commission on Nurture and Outreach, hey, this would be great. I think our presbytery would love to hear what he has to say. So here we are. So we're so glad that he is with us today. And as you're popping on here, I know we have some more people coming on. Please type your name in and your church name in. We're so glad to have all of you with us. So Katie, would you start us out with prayer?
Absolutely. Can I do some announcements first?
Oh, yes, please do.
Okay, so just share screen here.
No, we're not going to church tomorrow, Sally. Sorry about that.
So a reminder to everybody, you might want to mute yourself until you're ready to talk.
Okay.
You will get chances to talk in the chat.
Okay.
So mute your button down there so we don't get noise from multiple sources. These announcements I'm going to give you are on the PSV email. If you do not get those, sign up, call Dagmar for any help you might need at the Presbytery office and get those PSV online emails. So there's this opportunity coming up that we want you to know about. It's time is of the essence, and you are a population that's really likely to benefit from this. The Synod of the Covenant is financing really fine training for our presbyteries, and our presbytery is contributing to the pot that allows that to be possible. This is racial justice training, and it is geared to you individually, to where you really are in how you think about differences among people and what your reactions tend to be. So in this program, you take an assessment inventory ahead of time, and then you get a one-on-one counseling session to go over that information. I found that immensely valuable because it interpreted the results that I got. I've done this before. It interpreted those results in a way that didn't leave me feeling ashamed, but helped me see the strengths and the challenges in where I am right now. And then there's a group learning session where you get help about how to
You want this Zoom number?
even more.
It's
So
on right now.
if you want to sign up for this, you can go to that PSV email and click on this link. You register, you pay the full 150, because remember, this is an individual assessment and then consultation and then a class. We will reimburse $75 of that for at least the first 10 people. So check out that email. And then just very quickly, Our next Matthew 25 event will be coming out of COVID with vitality, offering you all kinds of resources about how to
You
do
haven't?
coming into this new.
Okay, it
From
is.
Would everybody remember, please, to mute? Mute yourself. We're hearing some people's conversations, just so you know. This is about how do churches come alive again in a way that's resurrection, not just the zombies walking around hungry to be together again, but actually new life, vital,
Just a
new,
minute.
amazing life. So those are our announcements. Also, if you would, on that presbytery email, go on there and join our YouTube account. Once we get over 100, we'll get some more features for the PSV YouTube account. So check that out. Also, this is being recorded. So you'll have all this. It will be on that YouTube channel for you to look at later. And Michael is graciously going to give us the slide deck. So you'll have that as a resource when he shows you graphs and charts and things. You'll be able to study those more in depth later. And please use chat if you have any questions. I will be monitoring the chat feed. So as we go along, if Michael says something and you don't quite understand or you need clarification of something, let us know. And I'm the one who can interrupt him. Okay, so put it in the chat and then I will interrupt Michael, and we will go from there. I think that's all the announcements. We actually get to start now. Would you pray with me, please? Holy and beautiful God, we give you thanks for all the possibility of becoming that is in this day and in this hour and a half before us. We give you thanks for each person on this call, for their ministry and their willingness to grow and change and confront hard things and believe that you are a God who is ready to behold, I do a new thing. We pray today that your spirit would work in, through, and between us, that you would bring us into a new place of resurrection and vitality so that we might let justice roll down like waters and right relationship like an ever-flowing stream. With grateful hearts, we give you thanks for Michael and the gifts that he has to share with us today. May your love, your peace, and your power flow through, guide us, and transform us. For it is through Christ and in the power of the Spirit that we pray. Amen.
Okay, well, welcome everyone who is here. And just one more reminder, if you can mute yourself, that would be super. And that way we won't pick up any background noise, I hope. So welcome everyone. Again, my name is Jenny Whitford. I'm from Worthington. We have on the Commission for Nurture and Outreach a series of talks and workshops and webinars helping support the Matthew 25 initiative, which is tackling structural racism and poverty and congregational vitality. And so Michael is here today. Michael Wilkos is Senior Vice President at the United Way in Columbus. And he is going to share the historic things that have happened, maps and charts and things we can document about Columbus and how there are some systems in place that we're up against and some things perhaps that we can do to help combat that. So welcome, Michael.
Great, thank you. And good morning, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be with all of you this morning. I want to just start by saying that the presentation that I have put together for you this morning is really through the lens of empathy and non-judgment, discovery. It's a reflection of my own personal journey. I was chatting with Katie and Jenny in preparation of this to say that I have been a student and a practitioner of social justice and racial equity since 1985. And I thought I was very far along in my journey. And I have realized over the last 12 months that I wasn't as far as I thought I was, right? And that I'm learning new things, and this presentation is really about getting us to a common understanding of the region that we share, and that we all play a part in this. And so with that, I'm going to share my screen, but we're going to talk about lots of things, right? We're going to talk about poverty and prosperity, the housing market in our metropolitan region and why it's behaving the way it is, gentrification and displacement, the maps of opportunity. We're going to talk about child outcomes and the history of urban development, the history of cities, and how the history of structural and historical racism is really alive and well in 2021. And it is still determining who succeeds and who doesn't. So with that, let's make sure the screen will come up. I'll look to you, Katie or Jenny, to tell me that the slides are up.
It looks good.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
Mhm.
So here's where I grew up my entire childhood. My mom and dad lived in this house for 47 years. And the neighborhood I grew up in had 350 homes. All 350 were homeowners, and all 350 were white. I never really thought about why my neighborhood looked the way it did, why it was occupied by the people that it was. This was in a suburban community called Boardman. It's about 40,000 people, and it's a suburb immediately adjacent to Youngstown, which has a very different economic present and past than Columbus. I moved to Columbus as an undergrad, and I get a job working here, an apartment complex of about 350 housing units. But it was about 60% white, 40% black. I'm 21 years old. I worked 20 hours a week, Monday through Friday, and 10 hours a week on Saturday and Sunday, where I was the only employee. And I was showing apartments. I was told several things by my employer, two of which were, when I'm showing possible apartments, do not assign Black people to units near the rental office, because they wanted to make sure when white customers came onto the property that they thought the property was more white than what it was. And by the way, this apartment complex is located near the intersection of Morse Road and Westerville Road, so kind of between Northland and Easton. I'm also told that if I take an application, I'm supposed to put a tick mark on the application in a particular corner so the people at the home office know the race of the applicant so they could maintain that racial balance. This didn't feel right to me as a 21-year-old that grew up in the suburbs. I didn't know it was illegal. But I called down to the HUD office in downtown Columbus, and I told them, this is what I'm being told to do by my employer, and it doesn't feel good. And the person said, not only does it not feel good, it is illegal. And would I be willing to keep a log of all of the times I'm instructed to do things to break the law? And I did. And I was very nervous because I thought, I was going to get caught by my employer. I was going to get fired. I was willing to get fired to do the right thing. But that experience fundamentally changed my life in 1988, because when I left Youngstown to come to Columbus, I thought I was coming to the Opportunity City. I thought I was coming to the state capital and a university town, and I thought things were different here. And it was a rude awakening that it was not. And the willingness that people had to just say these things to me, assuming that because I was their same race, that I would be a participant in that injustice. One of the books I've read over the last 12 months was White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. And she speaks about how early neighborhoods are socially organized through that lens of race. So how did she get the message that white people were better? She said, consider how we talk about neighborhoods. This is how everybody in my neighborhood talked about neighborhoods growing up. They were good, safe, clean, desirable. And those neighborhoods in Youngstown that were not white, people called them bad and dangerous and crime-ridden and to be avoided. When I got a driver's license, I was told by my parents, only drive on Glenwood and Market Street. Any other street, I became vulnerable to crime and violence. How was I told good white neighborhoods were good and Black neighborhoods were bad? Very early, I was told these messages. Further, Robin DiAngelo says she can tell you whether or not a neighborhood is getting whiter or more diverse based on whether or not the property values in that neighborhood are going up faster or slower than the median for that community. So fast forward This is where I live now, which is in Wineland Park. It's a multifamily building. I live on the right side, rent the left side out. The neighborhood I live in is about 70% in the federal poverty level. 90% of my neighborhood is renters, and my neighborhood has been a mixed race, mixed income neighborhood for a long time. I'm just north of Italian Village, just about south of the Ohio State University, a few blocks from High Street. I am proud that I live in a mixed race, mixed income neighborhood, but I also realize that my presence in this neighborhood, I'm a gentrifier, and there are unintended consequences of the fact that I live in this community. Now, I live on the same street my very first apartment was on in 1988. So I kind of joke that in 3 decades, I haven't gotten very far in Columbus. But the reality is, if you want to define who I am as a person, my age, my race, level of education, and income, I'm a gentrifier. It is not how I behave in my heart. It's not how I walk alongside my neighbors. But I must be aware that despite my personal and professional journey and the fact that I grew up in a homogeneous home ownership white neighborhood, and I do not live in a place like that now, that doesn't mean that I'm still not contributing and making problems worse for folks. At the same time, I'm making things better. Also in White Fragility, Robin DiAngelo talks about these kinds of questions. If people of color don't live in your neighborhood, you need to ask yourself, why don't they? And where do people of color live? When you were growing up, or even now, were you ever encouraged to go to neighborhoods that were different? And when we even talk about these things now, one of the codes, you'll see it in real estate listings all the time. Good schools, right? Well, who goes to good schools and who goes to bad schools? When you look at the list published recently in Columbus Business First, they list the 25 best school districts in the state of Ohio. They are the least racially and economically diverse communities in the entire state. When you look at the high schools that send the most children to the Ohio State University, they are coming from some of the least economically integrated schools. Some of them are diverse like Dublin, but they're not economically diverse. The other book that has dramatically changed my understanding over the last year was Ibram Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist, where he says one endorses either the idea of racial hierarchy as a racist or racial equality as an anti-racist. One either believes the problems are rooted in groups of people as a racist, or locates the roots of the problems in power and policies as an anti-racist. Prior to reading this book, I would have told you I was not racist. I have now come to the understanding, and it crushed me, that much of my day, I am participating in dismantling structural racism. And then minutes later, I might be an unknowingly and unwilling participant in perpetuating racist policies, because any program that has a disproportionate racial outcome, that's a racist policy. That took me a minute to understand, but now that I understand it, I'm unpacking things like the nonprofits that United Way funds. We fund 93 nonprofits in Franklin County. Our board of trustees just approved a new lineup on Tuesday. 40% of all the nonprofits United Way now funds are led by a person of color. And 38% of Franklin County is people of color. We have finally gotten to racial equity in the nonprofits we fund based on leadership. He further goes on in the book to say the term racist is not a pejorative. It's not the equivalent of a slur, but it's descriptive. And the only way for us to undo racism is to consistently identify and describe it. What he says is that when we use the word racist, most of us will cringe and it freezes us into inaction. I would like for you to be vulnerable and a little more empathetic and understand the word racist is not a slur. It is a description of a disproportionate outcome. And we, all of us, including me, are participating in racist systems. And I need to be better at not doing that as I move forward. So part of what's driving change in this community, we are rapidly growing. We've added over 200,000 people in the last 9 years. The rest of Ohio has lost 67,000 people. What's driving market demand and push and pull and who's moving in and who's moving out is some of our growth. And in fact, the growth of our metropolitan region, the 10-county MSA, has been slightly picking up speed. In fact, a recent report that came out of the impacts of COVID, Columbus Metro had the 6th highest increase in population growth due to COVID in America for 2 reasons. All the people who used to be young people who were working in New York and San Francisco and Seattle and Miami came home. And all those young people that Ohio State University and other universities were graduating who were taking jobs, took those jobs virtually, and they didn't go. And so Columbus's growth is picking up. And where that growth is occurring has fundamentally shifted. Where if you see here in the 90s and 2000s, Franklin County was half or less than half of the growth. In the last decade, Franklin County accommodated 70% of the growth of our region. And it manifests itself like this. These are 3 projects that are all residential that are proposed for downtown Columbus right now. We have projects like this that are all under construction behind COSI in Franklinton as that neighborhood is dramatically wrestling with demographic and income change. And projects like this on North 4th and West Broad Street and Long Street on the Near East Side, and even in the suburban communities. And the top right is Bridge Park in Dublin, which was a failed 1980s strip mall that's now becoming a very dense development of housing, offices, and entertainment, as Dublin is recognizing the empty nesters that now live in Dublin who love Dublin, want to stay in Dublin, but they don't want those 3,500 and 4,500 square foot homes anymore. But the scale of what we're seeing in this region is significant, and it is shifting. And this is the trend that we're going to continue to see, because 1 million people will be coming to this region in the next 30 years, and that growth will look very different as we evolve. The reality is we look at all this construction and we assume that we live in this incredibly prosperous region, but growth and prosperity are not the same thing. This is what the federal government has established for the income guidelines for poverty, right? So at $13,000 a year, a single person is above the federal poverty line. When I share this statistic, most people are shocked to see how low the bar is to establish poverty. We at United Way double these numbers in order to have eligibility of any of those 93 nonprofits doing work, which means that would be about $26,000 a year for a single person. Still really low, but this is what it looks like in our region. We saw a huge jump. The yellow bars indicate the number of people who are economically vulnerable, meaning living at 200% of federal poverty. The red dot is the unemployment rate. We saw a huge increase in economic vulnerability in the Great Recession of 2008 to 2010. But every recovery and recession in American history has always behaved in the same way until this one, which is you lose jobs in a recession, economic vulnerability goes up. That's what happened in 2008, 2010. And in every recovery, you normally see in the second year, third year of a recovery, the number of people who are economically vulnerable begins to drop. That didn't happen this time. It didn't happen in Franklin County. It didn't happen in our region, and it didn't happen in the United States. It's not our fault. And I'm going to oversimplify the American economy of the current past decade, because we have economists that sit on our advisory councils that help guide our investments. And they've described the Columbus region this way. 35% of us have college degrees. The economy's been working great for us. The other 35% of our region, plumbers, electricians, construction folks, engineers, all the people building this stuff that you see, they're also doing great. But there's 30% of our community, which is about 400,000 people, who every single month do not have enough income to meet their monthly expenses. Think about people who work at Target, call centers, distribution centers, the gig economy, the part-time, part-year, right? The majority of people who are economically vulnerable in our region are working, and they are working full-time. While the federal government and state government provides financial supports to those that are very poor, it's the nonprofit sector, it is the faith community that is providing those additional resources so people who work can make ends meet. Everything we fund, from kindergarten readiness to a high school graduation program to a basic needs food or housing stability, all of that is a workforce development program, because the vast majority of work that we are all serving are working people. Here's the reality. The city of Columbus in the year 2000, 32% of our city was eligible to be funded by a United Way program. And by 2018, 40% of Columbus was eligible for a United Way program. During that period of time, the city of Columbus grew by 171,000 people, and economic vulnerability increased, which means 70% of the net population growth of our city have been people who struggle to make ends meet. We are a more economically vulnerable city and region than before this growth spurt, because too many of the jobs we've created do not pay a living wage. And because we're growing, we will have more low-income people. If the rate of economic vulnerability doesn't budge, and we certainly didn't see it budge before COVID, we saw it get exacerbated because of COVID, that means we have 70,000 more low-income people coming to this region. And they're not going to live in all those shiny buildings that I showed you earlier, because our nation and our state is not in the business of building new affordable housing that matches anywhere close to the existing demand, let alone the future demand. And we're going to talk about what's happening in our housing market, and it is scary. Here's the map of the geography of poverty. This is going to be very important, because when you look at this map in 1970, the poverty rate in Franklin County was 10%, 3 percentage points below the US average, and 85,000 people were living in poverty. But when you look at the map, and I'm going to do these quickly, I want you to focus on the areas in dark blue and dark green. Pay attention, don't pay too much attention to this big area right there, because most of that is John Glenn International Airport, and there's very few people who live there. It just looks like a big area. But the areas in darkest green and dark blue have the concentration of poverty. And here's how it has played out for the last 50 years. As a neighborhood started to get more vulnerable, the middle income and higher income people do what they can. They pick up and move out. And I'm going to oversimplify it. The white middle class picked up and moved out of urban neighborhoods, and the black middle class has picked up and moved out just 20 years after the white middle class did the same thing. And what researchers now say is 40% is the magic number. When a neighborhood's poverty rate hits 40%, that neighborhood no longer works for the people who are poor, and it doesn't work for the wealthy people in that neighborhood. As schools fail, as crime increase, people who can will leave. By 1980, you saw a further concentration. The poverty rate jumps from 10 to 12%. That's not because there was a huge increase, but look at how much more color is on the map, because what was happening in the 1970s, we had the court case for desegregation, and middle class people really started to flee places like Linden and the Near East Side and the West Side. Here we are in 1980. We now have a lot more blue as we started to see a real concentration of poverty in the urban core, which is fascinating because the concentration of urban poverty didn't come here until the 1980s. It was well underway by the 1960s in the Daytons and Clevelands and Detroits, because Columbus wasn't dependent upon blue collar jobs the way other markets were. Here we were in 2000, the poverty rate had fallen because the 1990s saw some of the greatest income gains, a very prolonged, stable national economy, and women were still entering the workforce. So any suppression of wages in the 1990s was offset by high labor force participation rates. Here we were by 2018. We have a very, very different situation now. The challenge with the poverty in our community now is several-fold. One, We have far more neighborhoods suffering from concentrated poverty, and they are failing. And that's where we're seeing an increase of violence and other social issues, which we'll talk in great detail today. We're also seeing the mobility of poverty. It is moving northeast up Cleveland Avenue and Westerville Road, right into the Westerville School District, and poverty is moving rapidly east around Bexley, through Whitehall. It's knocking on the door of Reynoldsburg and Pickerington. It is an unstoppable juggernaut. When the region grows, we will be adding 70,000 additional poor people to the region. Where will they go? Because the reality is poverty is now moving away from downtown Columbus, and the areas of our region that are most vulnerable to this increase in poverty, it's all the areas built in the 1960s and 1970s. Westland, Northland, Eastland. These are the prototypes of the suburbanization of poverty, which are not well served by public transit. They don't have strong neighborhood associations. They don't have the history, and there are not social service agencies located in those areas. So the folks on Kimberly Parkway and Route 104 and Hamilton Road, right, south of Interstate 70 on the east side, this is the center of violence of our region. The Columbus Dispatch recently did an assessment of gun shootings and violence and said if you live on the east side of Columbus, Broad, James, Hamilton, 70, you have a 1 in 57 chance of being hit by gunfire. What's further compounding this is I know it feels like there's a lot of construction in the metropolitan region. We have been chronically underbuilding housing for a decade. There are always peaks and valleys in our metropolitan region. There's credit crunches, there's recessions, but even these peaks that you see going back to 1980, even during the peaks, we've not been building enough new housing to accommodate that population growth. We need every year 14,000 units of production just to meet the population growth for that year. Last year was the first year in a decade we were able to exceed 8,000 units. We got to 11,000 last year. It was the highest year in 15 years. What this means is our region is short 50,000 housing units. We could literally drop in 50,000 additional housing units into the 10 county metro, and they could be filled the following day. We now have a critical scarcity of housing stock. The Columbus Board of Realtors recently published that the number of available homes for sale has never been lower, and that many homes are selling the day they get listed over asking price. What's driving this, right? So we've seen this huge increase in the median price of a home in the metropolitan region, jumped $30,000 in a year. This is unsustainable growth. Here is the current full market value of all of the homes that exist in these communities. In the dark blue are all the communities, Columbus, Grove City, Obetz, Groveport, Reynoldsburg, where the median price is below the county average. In light blue, Hilliard, Worthington, Westerville, Gahanna, those are the communities that are now hovering right around the county median. And in red, you see those that have exceeded the county median and have come to a price point that comes nowhere close to matching current incomes for our metropolitan region. If this rate of growth continues, our housing problem will be a crisis, just like it is in San Francisco and Austin and the DC metro. Our rental market is also now the tightest vacancy rate we've ever recorded since 1970. This is a function of how many people are looking for apartments based on how many apartments are available in the marketplace. Again, it might look like there's a lot of apartment complexes under construction. There's not nearly enough. And most communities in Columbus, in the suburban areas of Columbus, even in urban Columbus, people are fighting density tooth and nail. When you get into these suburban communities, say in Union County, we're working now with the Union County United Way, huge barriers are being put up to block multifamily or dense housing developments, which is further exacerbating gentrification and our housing crisis. In addition to this lack of supply of homes and apartments, we also now know that the Columbus housing market is just as highly racialized as it's ever been. In an eviction study where we looked at two different neighborhoods, a white area and a black area with the exact same incomes, we found that evictions were almost double what they were for the same kind of comparable neighborhood compared to a white area. Further, in the eviction study, they did a sample of everyone that was going through eviction court. And by the way, despite the moratorium, lots of evictions were still being filed. Columbus has more eviction filings than New York City, and they are 10 times our size. 23% of households in our community are female headed, and 22% are headed by an African American. And yet 71% of all households getting evicted are led by a woman, and 64% are led by a person of color. There is a huge gender and racial bias of who's going to eviction court. So now let's move into the maps of opportunity. The Ohio State University created these more than a decade ago. They were like Christmas for me as a urban geographer and someone with a master's degree in urban planning. And they were able to collect 17 indicators that you see here across 4 broad categories. And they were able to map this as geography. These things are collected annually. They're collected by very reliable secondary and primary data sets. And they're able to be layered on top of each other to create a single image as if we were looking at all 17 of these things at the same time. And here's the map. And by the way, you can zoom this out and do the metropolitan region. It gets a little harder to see when you get to the larger geography, but the map on the left is Franklin County. The map on the right is urban Columbus. The darker the color, the greater the level of opportunity. And what the Ohio State Kirwan Institute unveiled with these reports is the neighborhood you're born into and the neighborhood you continue to live in are some of the most important contributing factors to your life outcomes. Whether or not you finish high school, be a victim of crime, or develop diabetes, comes down to the neighborhood in which you live. If you look at the map on the right, you can find this is Parsons Avenue that runs along the Near East Side between the area south of Children's Hospital and the Near East Side. This dark red is Bexley. Here you have Linden, right? And in a typical environment, if you come back to the map of Franklin County, it might take you 12 miles to go from the low opportunity of Linden to the highest opportunity of Westerville and into Delaware County. In urban Columbus, all you have to do is cross Parsons Avenue, 35 feet. And it determines whether or not a house would sell for $600,000 or $30,000.
Yep.
So here's what's happening. Our region is growing and there's a housing crisis. So if we were Dayton or Detroit or Youngstown, these low opportunity neighborhoods might spill over into Marion Village and Schumacher Place and German Village and pull that neighborhood down. Bexley might feel vulnerable if there was crime on all 4 sides of Bexley. But because we're growing and there's a housing crisis, the reverse is happening. The prosperity of Bexley, the prosperity of downtown and German Village and Schumacher and Marion Village are spilling into the Near East Side. And it's putting a huge squeeze on that low-income neighborhood as the high opportunity bookends on either side of that poverty are now growing toward one another, and it's pushing the low-income people out. Geography matters, but so does race. The map on the left now shows you opportunity, now layered with race. The map on the left is where the Asian population lives. The map on the right is the white population. If you look at the map on the right, look at the pale yellow areas. There's very few white dots, except for the hilltop. And believe it or not, despite this strong economy and a housing crisis where there's not enough units, the hilltop is still struggling. Why? Because of the opioid epidemic. It's still got a grip on that neighborhood and it cannot get away from that drug epidemic. But the reality is we're now in an environment where 70% of white people live in the highest opportunity neighborhoods, and we're just unaware of the challenges of lack of jobs, lack of grocery stores, and the increase in violence that other people in our community are experiencing. Now we compare the Hispanic population on the left with the Black population on the right. If you look at the map on the right, 70% of Black residents of Franklin County live in the lowest opportunity neighborhoods, which means we now know that by age 5, a child growing up in poverty is already 1.5 years behind a middle-class child in their academic achievement. And the research shows most of those children will never catch up. Where you're born matters. And because opportunity is not evenly experienced, and because we are further organized by race, we've created an environment where it becomes very, very difficult for people of color to achieve prosperity. If you go back to the map on the left, you'll see that the Hispanic population lives in a very different geography. It's just outside the Black neighborhoods. It tends to be in low to moderate Northland, Whitehall, the far west side out toward the casino. Whitehall is now growing again for the first time in 30 years because as people move on from their single family homes to get better housing for their retirement, they're being replaced often enough with young families that are Hispanic and they have lots of kids. Whitehall's now growing. So now let's look at the organization of just the Black population over time. I'm going to do this in 20-year increments. This again looks very large around Grove City, the urban crest area. There weren't a lot of people down there in 1960. Each little square of color has about the same number of people. The Black population in Columbus was very much north of Broad, between Broad and 670 on the Near East Side and heading into Milo, Grogan, and Linden. By 1980, there was considerable movement northeast and east toward Bexley and heading south. At the same time, these neighborhoods were trending downward as you had the highway building had come to a conclusion and you had busing. The white population dramatically moved out. What you're going to see, however, in this map and many maps now from this point forward is this racial demarcation line of the railroad track along Interstate 71 all the way to Delaware County. That has been the race demarcation line in this region for a long time and continues to hold. Here's the population in 2000. The Black population did not begin to suburbanize in our region until the 1990s, and it was Westerville, Gahanna, Reynoldsburg, and Pickerington, right? Because that movement has been in this very predictable pattern in the northeast and east direction.
Yeah.
So I love this quote by Jonathan Kozol, one of my favorite authors, where he says, an awful lot of people come to college with the strange idea that there's no longer segregation in America's schools, that our schools are basically equal. Neither of these things are true. Franklin County is 22% Black. The Ohio State University student enrollment is 5.5% Black. If children of color are regulated to school districts and school buildings within that district that are not performing academically, how does an 18-year-old achieve economic prosperity later in life if in fact they don't have access to a high quality education? I could not get into the Ohio State University if I applied today because I had a 21 ACT. That was good, but the average ACT at the Ohio State University is now over 29. In their effort to become a national leader of high quality public education as an institution of research and development, in an institution that's building $3 billion of buildings between the new Wexner Hospital Tower and a new West Campus Research and Development Park that will rival that of Raleigh-Durham, they have, in my opinion, unknowingly put a barrier for equity with regard to enrollment. I don't want to say that the enrollment process at the Ohio State University is racist, But if I use Ibram Kendi's definition, where the term racist is not a pejorative, that anything that has a disproportionate outcome that doesn't achieve equity, and if the city of Columbus is 30% Black, if Franklin County is 22% Black, if the state of Ohio is 12% Black, but the Ohio State University enrollment is only 5.5%, we need to look at that enrollment process. It's not the Ohio State University's fault that children of color across our state are regulated to underperforming school districts, but it is, in my opinion, the role of a public land grant university to provide economic opportunity to all. Here is the current map of just the city of Columbus for young people organized by race. In red would be young people of color, and blue would be where white children are growing up in Columbus. The sad reality is, while we are highly organized by race, young people are growing up more racially segregated than the overall population, as economic and racial segregation has becoming hyper organized in the modern economic system. And this is an issue not just for Columbus. 75% is where we as a nation have established academic proficiency for third graders on the ELA assessment. It used to be that Columbus was the single school district that was academically underperforming. But as that poverty, as economic vulnerability, as people of color are moving northeast and east, what do we now see, right? Whitehall, Groveport, Southwestern, Hilliard, Reynoldsburg, Canal Winchester. 50% of all of the school-age children in Franklin County are now attending a school district that is academically not hitting that mark. Some school districts, by the way, because of COVID and remote learning, and I won't give the specific school district, but we've seen school districts where their third grade proficiency testing has fallen 30 to 40 percentage points over the last year, as children from low-income neighborhoods and low-income school districts did not successfully transition to a virtual environment. And what we know in this community, if you do not complete your academic journey, you are set up for a life of income inequality. If we could just get more children to finish high school, we could cut that poverty rate in half. And we also know that family income is the strongest predictor to measure success, both in the classroom, but also economically later in life. And here's what it looks like. 24% of all the children in Franklin County are now living in poverty, much higher than the overall poverty rate for our community. And what did I say earlier? By age 5, if you're growing up in poverty, you're already 1.5 years behind a middle-class child in academic achievement. Our future workforce does not look good. We have a high level of educational attainment in our metropolitan region and in Franklin County. This is not because we are growing the academic pipeline from within. We are a huge importer of young 18-year-olds from some of the wealthiest places around the state and nation who come to our universities, and they like Columbus, and there are jobs here, and they stay. The sad reality is, here's the map of Franklin County based on net worth for 15 to 24-year-olds when you start out in life. If you look at the chart there to the top right, young people right out of high school in Upper Arlington, south of Lane Avenue, already are starting out with $570,000 in net worth, where in Franklinton, it's under $8,000. Income inequality in Franklin County starts at 72 times to 1. If you listen to Warren Buffett, he says the problem in the United States is not that there isn't enough wealth, it's how that wealth is distributed. Here, you start off 72 times to 1. Go forward 4 decades, income inequality in Franklin County grows from 72 times to 1 to 250 times to 1. In the last decade before retirement, look at the number of places of geography where net wealth is at $3 million. Yet in the Mount Vernon Avenue on the Near East Side, people are looking toward retirement with just $12,000 in assets. In my own neighborhood of Vineland Park, people are in that last decade of income earning potential with only $26,000 in net wealth. Wealth begets wealth. Good school districts train young people to be academically prosperous in college and economically prosperous in life. And we've also been told this belief, at least I was told the belief, that, the United States is the land of opportunity. Well, this is the map of the country that shows income, your ability to move up the economic ladder in life over 40 years, meaning if you're born in the bottom 20th percentile, what's the likelihood by age 40 you will make it to the 80th percentile, meaning you're not in poverty and you're not going to the 1%, but you're moving 60 percentage points on that economic ladder, which would be going from the working poor to solidly middle class. For our metropolitan region, that only happens 5% of the time. The vast majority of people will die in the economic band in which they were born. We have a narrative of success where people have overcome the odds. It's a narrative that just doesn't happen as often as people think it does. So we're going to move quickly into gentrification and displacement because it's getting a lot of attention these days. They're very different and they're not happening nearly to the degree that people think they are. Gentrification is when wealthy people move into an existing area, they increase rents and property values, they cause long-term residents to leave because of increased housing costs, and they change a neighborhood's culture. And we now have a data mapping tool that looks at every single census tract by age, income, and race between 2000 and 2016. It was done by the University of Minnesota Law School, and it's interactive. So any one of you can go to this site and check out your own neighborhood. Here's our region. In red and peach are all the areas that got poorer between 2000 and 2016, because what did I say in the beginning? 32% of Columbus in the year 2000 was eligible to be funded by a United Way program. Went from 32% to 40%. You cannot have whole-scale gentrification if the region's getting poorer. If the region was getting wealthier, you could. 4% of Columbus has experienced gentrification. That's the areas in blue. But 43% of the region has gotten poorer. If you do not see color on this map, that means that the area, Upper Arlington, Grandview, Bexley, Linden, was either wealthy in 2000 and still wealthy, or poor and still poor. There's a lot of change going on, but there's 10 times more neighborhoods getting poorer than getting wealthier. And again, Northland, Eastland, Westland. Let's focus on Northland real quick. You can look at the data on the left side of this chart. I want to point out that 16,387 white people moved out of Northland and 16,473 Black people moved in, while they also increased in Hispanic, and 11,400 new Americans moved into Northland in 16 years. That's the entire city of Powell or the entire city of Bexley of new Americans moving into a neighborhood in just 16 years. The global diaspora is playing out on streets of Columbus in very high rates. If you zoom into the core of Northland, we detected something that I've never seen in the 70 years of economic decline of American neighborhoods. As neighborhoods like Linden and Hilltop and the South Side got poorer, the middle class people would pick up and move out, and the neighborhood would then get even more poor. And they'd lose people, huge amounts of people. Now we see Morrison Carl, the core of Northland, jumped 12.5% in population. They didn't build any new housing units in Northland. So you think to yourself, well, how is a neighborhood getting larger in population while not adding housing units? I might have been a single person living in a 2-bedroom apartment, and I don't think the area is maybe looking as good. So I pick up and I move to a new apartment in Delaware County, Polaris Parkway. And who replaces me is a family of 5 from Bhutan, who makes less than what I made as a single person. So in Northland, the percentage of people who struggle economically jumped from 41% to 73% in 16 years. So we might say, let's rush off to Northland and do all of our philanthropy and supporting people. The faith community and the philanthropic community, the nonprofit community needs to go into Northland. And I'll say, well, hold on. Because even though Linden didn't show up as colorful as Northland, the increase of economic vulnerability in Linden also went up. It's just that Linden started out with 48% of the people who were struggling, and it went to 63%. But when you compare that Northland band from 24 to 43, Northland went from being more prosperous than Columbus as a city to less prosperous, while the entire city was becoming less prosperous. And the only place where gentrification was recorded during that 16-year period was along High Street, short north, downtown, into Brewery District and German Village. Now that those areas have filled up, right? There are, by the way, in my tiny neighborhood of Wineland Park, there are 10 mid-rise buildings to start construction in 2021. The land is running out, and now that development is running east on Broad and west on Broad, and Franklinton and the Near East Side, watch out, because that's where the market wants to go, and that's where there is developable land, and it will be massively pushing people out over the next decade, in my opinion. So displacement is not gentrification. Displacement is the fact that your housing costs are going up more than your income. And guess what? In Northland, home prices and rents are rapidly going up in Northland. Not because rich people are moving in, because more low-income people are competing against each other for a finite supply. Every time we fight a 5-story apartment building at Whittier and Jaeger on the edge of German Village, or we fight a 10-story apartment building on High Street, or we fight a dense suburban subdivision, you're hurting low and moderate income people by limiting the supply of housing where there's already a critical shortage. So displacement, right, is basically you're prevented from moving into a neighborhood that was accessible because your income, target, call center, distribution center, part-time, part-year, your income's not going up because incomes in this community have jumped 1.3% in each year for a decade. The average housing increase cost was 7%. If housing costs are jumping 6% a year more than income, and that has played out every year for a decade, we have a housing crisis. And the displacement is happening in every single county, in every single census tract. The Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission created an interactive tool that measures how many people are vulnerable to displacement. And every single census tract in Union County and every single census tract in Delaware County is now experiencing some level of displacement because housing costs are surpassing income. Every single part of our region is dealing with displacement. And again, 10 times the number of neighborhoods are getting poorer, they're getting wealthier, but everybody's housing costs are jumping. So now we're going to finish with a history lesson. It was really important that I share with you the geography and the data around economic vulnerability and who's succeeding and who isn't in modern day Columbus. All of this, however, is rooted in 3 types of ways we organized our cities. One was a racial zoning code. The other was expulsive. The other one was exclusionary. Expulsive is like, we don't want factories and wastewater treatment plants next to our houses. Racial was, we don't want white people and black people living next door to each other. Exclusionary is, we want our single family homes to have large lots. We want the facades to be done with brick. We want the houses to be a minimum square footage. And while we've done that to organize neighborhoods so they look good, they've had a really unintended consequence of organizing metropolitan regions by income and race. Zoning came to this country from Germany. It was really about separating land uses and also people, back to the whole idea of we just wanted people to be safe. We didn't want sewage to be running through our streets like we once did. The very first example of racial zoning was in Baltimore, but the courts struck it down just 7 years later. Here is the Baltimore City Plan adopted by their city council. Read the quote. Blacks should be quarantined in isolated slums in order to reduce the incidence of civil disturbance, to prevent the spread of communicable disease into nearby white neighborhoods, and to protect property values among the white majority. This was a city council and mayoral approved plan. Black people were going to give communicable diseases to white people. This was policy. The court said 7 years later, this is illegal. But then it all moved into the private sector, and we did it with restrictive covenants. Nearly 70% of every subdivision that got platted in our region, suburbs, Columbus neighborhoods, had a race restriction. You can look at this chart on the right side. These were the actual words that were used in the restrictive covenants that said, look at that, 4 subdivisions in Whitehall were platted, right? But Negroes, mulattoes, persons wholly or partly of African blood, undesirables, foreigners could never own that property. There was this tool from the Homeowners Loan Corporation. They hired surveyors and they went out to assess the viability of a neighborhood, to get insurance, to get a bank loan. And those assessors would look at the physical conditions. You know, were the houses falling down? Were there not storm drains? Were there obnoxious uses nearby that would put pollution? But they also looked at the social conditions. And so whether or not there were people of different races, of different blood or origin, and it wasn't just Black, right? There were Jews and Persians, Syrians, Italians. They would write that down. And whatever they wrote down would determine whether or not credit would be issued to that neighborhood. And this is the map that was created for Columbus. In pink are all the areas where those HOLC assessors called those neighborhoods hazardous. The Near East Side, Franklinton, the area around Children's Hospital, the short north loop heading into Linden. In yellow were all the areas that were third grade where they said these are rapidly declining and you should be very cautious, which meant the rest of the short north, all of Linden into Milo Grogan, the rest of the south side, including German Village. In green was the most desirable. Bexley, Grandview, Arlington, Clintonville. Those were the areas that the HOLC assessor said, these are safe bets. Let's talk about Upper Arlington. In the book, Secrets Under the Parking Lot, was written about a Black man by the name of Pleasant Litchford, who owned a lot of land in present-day Upper Arlington. During the time he owned that land, there were Black laws. Not only did he have to pay the equivalent of a $15,000 fee just to be a Black person to own land in what was a township, it was not Upper Arlington. He also had to have a signed affidavit from 2 white people that said he wouldn't cause problems for white people. What's important is that Black people could not be buried in cemeteries, so they were often buried on private land. And Pleasant Litchford's family, which was not in a cemetery, was put on private land. Lo and behold, that land is now where Upper Arlington High School is. And in August of last year, during the renovation of Upper Arlington's High School and the rebuilding of sites there, they exhumed 6 bodies where the headstones were removed, but the bodies never were. And the book Secrets Under the Parking Lot talks about this injustice of what was done to Black communities at that time and how communities might have transitioned from a Black community to a white community. So much of the land that Pleasant Litchford once owned was then sold eventually to King Thompson. King Thompson Realtors, they developed the site as part of that whole City Beautiful movement, and it was south of Lane Avenue. There's the marketing brochure, the Country Club District, 1,000 acres restricted, meaning it was restricted where mulattoes, Blacks, Jews, others could never own property south of Lane Avenue. Now we get to the 1970s, federal laws have changed. This is a suit that was filed where a Black doctor was looking to buy a home in the core of Upper Arlington. And a group of Upper Arlington homeowners, which dubbed themselves as the Northwest Arlington Homeowners Association, purchased the home before the Black doctor could purchase the home, and they flipped the home to King Thompson Realty, the same developer that put in those restrictive covenants, because they wanted to ensure homogeneous homeownership in Upper Arlington. They were found guilty in a court of law, and the local courts ordered the Northwest Arlington Homeowners Association to disband because they were violating federal law and wanting to keep Upper Arlington white. What is shocking is that despite the Realtors Association code of ethics, nobody was ever held accountable to these practices, not just in Arlington, but across the state and nation, in preventing people of color from owning homes. This was the home that doctor tried to buy. And then in 2018, this young boy shows up to deliver newspapers on the very first day. And people called 911 in Upper Arlington to report him, and the police stopped him for being in the community. Now, people reported that he was violating their no soliciting laws because he was delivering things on people's porches, which were things that he was hired to do. How is it that that young boy could be stopped by the police for just walking in broad daylight in Upper Arlington? If you look at Upper Arlington's demographics from the US Census in 2019, there's 35,300 people in Upper Arlington, only 105 are Black. If 2019 looks just like 1919, we should be asking ourselves a question: why don't Black people live in our community? All those questions Robin DiAngelo asks us, all those things Ibram Kendi writes in his book, are things that we need to start unpacking. And I don't want to blame suburban communities. Again, this is empathy, non-judgment, discovery. It's a personal journey. It's getting us to a common understanding. But look, New Albany, which is only about 11,000 people, 900 are Black. And New Albany is the only place in the metropolitan region wealthier than Upper Arlington as far as home price. Why is it if you're a $500,000 or $750,000 or $1 million home buyer and you're Black, you're not going to Upper Arlington, but you are going to New Albany? I believe it's because, well, New Albany wasn't built with restrictive covenants. New Albany didn't have a group of homeowners that were found guilty in a court of law of trying to circumvent and violate federal law. And New Albany also happens to be in the trajectory in that northeast east direction of where the Black middle class and upper middle class is suburbanizing. But it also suggests to me that $1 million Black homeowner feels more comfortable in New Albany than Upper Arlington. I know tons of people in Upper Arlington. They're great folks and they're open-minded and they would welcome anyone into their community. The reality is it's just not happening. Let's go back. Here's the map for a refresher. I want to now focus in those areas that were pink or yellow in those assessor cards. And here are some pictures. These are the actual quotes that would be done under one of those homeowner loan corporation assessors, who is then recommending whether or not banks or insurance companies should loan or insure real estate. Flytown, that's the whole area near Harrison West that got demolished in the 50s. Here we have the area of Naughton Street, which is the Near East Side. This is essentially where Columbus State and the highway is now. Here we have another picture of East Long Street. Look at the quantity of the built environment along East Long Street, which was all entirely dismantled. As these assessors would rate these neighborhoods hazardous, I want to say that word over and over. These neighborhoods were hazardous, not because they were hazardous, chemical or obnoxious uses. They were hazardous because of the race and ethnicity of who lived there. Here's another one on Bartham Avenue on the south side of Columbus in an area known as Steelton because it was near Buckeye Yards. It was hazardous because it had foreigners. And even Italians were a hazardous group of people. I love this picture from Harrison West when you look at the wrap on the spare tire in the back of the car. These neighborhoods were put behind a long time ago, and they have stayed there. Here are just some quotes from some of those HOLC cards that folks would write. If there's 4 Negro families on Columbus Avenue in Akron, don't give it loans. If 5% of a neighborhood is Negro, don't insure the houses. And you can read the longer quote there for Cleveland Avenue. What's important about that tool that is now 80 years old, a new study was done that looked at home values just since 1980. and they looked at the exact kind of house. Think about the houses in Grandview Heights or Clintonville or Driving Park or South Bexley or Westgate. It's all the same built environment. Many of them were built by the same builder, same architect. But those areas that were identified as green, the high level of protection, those homes have gone up $200,000 more in value than the exact same house in Driving Park between Livingston and Whittier. If you didn't know the history of race, if you didn't know the history of segregation, the house itself is the same house. But these things are well alive and they're building people's wealth even today. And so here are some of the contemporary impacts for those neighborhoods that were redlined. Those formerly redlined areas have the highest rates of social vulnerability, and 74% of all neighborhoods in America that were rated low value on those HOLC assessor cards are still the lowest value neighborhoods today. And here's a list of all of the things. You can find every low-income neighborhood in the Columbus region based on Google Satellite because there's just not as many trees. Lead exposure, infant mortality, life expectancy, all of these things are occurring in all those neighborhoods that got held behind by that tool. And then, right around the time laws were changing, the American economy is booming, we started to create this perfect storm to create this housing boom, right? The war is over, cities were overcrowded, population was booming, birth rates were driving up, and the government got heavily into the business of building highways and building neighborhoods. However, 99% of all of the federal subsidy after World War II went to white households only. And even returning Black veterans found it very difficult for them to find housing in neighborhoods that the federal government was giving incentives to have them be created. And you had things like this. Here's Interstate 270 on the west side. Not only was the federal government building highways to open up land for opportunity, but then the neighborhoods that were being created with federal subsidy were only going to white consumers. While in the urban neighborhoods that in the 1930s were written off as hazardous, here we have Livingston and Parsons. Because they were written off in the 1930s as hazardous, and now the federal government's in the business of building new housing and highways, they were able to justify whole-scale demolition. The highways went into the neighborhoods that those HOLC assessors said were hazardous. That same policy was occurring in the 1950s. So you look at that area of the near South Side, in 14 years, huge areas of demolition. And while the highways were being built, you really couldn't go north or south above Interstate 70, which cut entire neighborhoods off. If you could, you would pick up and move out. And here we have Interstate 71 going through that same area that those HOLC assessors said were hazardous. If they're already hazardous, then let's just build the highway right through. Milo Grogan is now two neighborhoods because the highway cut it in half. Oh. Here's a picture of what the neighborhood looked like at ground level. This is Interstate 71 at Hudson, where Lowe's and MAP-Free Stadium are. Imagine what that did to those neighborhoods that were right on the edge of what would be a decade-long construction site of demolition and then digging out a trench and building a highway. And then shortly thereafter came busing. And in Columbus, we had this annexation policy, and what it meant that the school district boundaries were remained locked in place as the city was annexing, which created an environment where school district boundaries and political jurisdictions are not coterminous. And what happened in Columbus was nothing less than shocking. In the 7 years between when the court case was filed and when busing started, 33,000 children left the Columbus School District. That would be the equivalent of, in just 7 years, Columbus City Schools lost the entire enrollment of Gahanna, Reynoldsburg, Upper Arlington, Groveport Madison, and New Albany in 7 years. And most of that loss were white middle-class students, where families picked up and leapfrogged out of the Columbus School District often stayed in the city of Columbus, but were now able to go into one of those suburban school districts because the city of Columbus is in 11 of the 16 school districts within Franklin County. In a single year, because of this fear, Linden, which was still a white community, mixed race community, but actually more white than black in the 1960s, half of the white children left Linden McKinley in a single year. And I love this quote from a 1980 Columbus Monthly article from a student who basically said, a student walked up to her and said that she thought she was in a gang just because she's black. There was huge racial and economic conflict in Linden during this period of time. The highways ripped through the neighborhood. 15 years later comes busing, and there was huge mistrust of systems, both the school district, the government, and the police department. Also in 1980, and I will send this to Katie and Jenny, there's a 21-page article in the May issue of Columbus Monthly about white police officers shooting and killing unarmed Black youth. It further goes on to say that there is such a public relations challenge with the police department. They cannot drive through Linden and the University District in broad daylight without citizens throwing bottles and rocks at their cars. There was a Black police officer who turned in white colleagues who shot and killed an unarmed Black youth in the back. He was under 24-hour protection of his family and home because of retaliation from other police officers. There is a further report from the Columbus Bar Association that says the culture of the Columbus Police Department is using fear and intimidation to dismantle certain communities in Columbus. It further goes on to say the Columbus police should be able to subdue a suspect without beating that person into unconsciousness. That was a 1949 Columbus Bar Association assessment of the Columbus Police Department. It is shocking to me that these reports have been issued by legitimate mainstream organizations. It is worth noting that a white, heterosexual, male-dominated system, the Bar Association in 1949, was not only able to see that injustice, but had the courage to issue that report. 72 years later, the same report is getting issued about a broken culture of fear and intimidation and racial disproportionality. So we now have this, right? Columbus City Schools in blue, the rest of Columbus in green. The upper middle class, predominantly white areas of Columbus are served in those green areas, and the Columbus City School District is essentially serving a people of color and lower income portion of the city. And it all wraps up in these quick maps. Again, that 1930s HOLC map in pink and yellow with the areas that they said were not credit worthy. Compare that in 2006, where the foreclosure crisis started. Black, blue-collar neighborhoods, Linden, south of Children's Hospital, and the Hilltop was the core of the foreclosure crisis. And now we compare it to the map on the right. This was a 2010 map created by the Ohio State University. The darker the color was the increase of predatory loans, check cashing places, buy here, pay here. Whether it was the foreclosure crisis of 2006, it is predatory loans issued by the private sector. They all look like those 1930s maps. There continues to be structural and historic racist systems operating. And while we have said government can no longer do it, the private sector continues the practice. And so now when you pull every building permit over the last 10 years, the same neighborhoods that had redlining, that had the foreclosure crisis, that have predatory private sector businesses are now the neighborhoods, because of chronic underbuilding, are now the areas where real estate investors are able to flip homes. Because if there's not enough building going on in Delaware and Union and Licking counties, and there's not enough building going on Sawmill Parkway, people are trying to find houses anywhere, and they've come into Linden and the Near East Side and around Children's Hospital, and they're snatching up everything they can, and they're sinking a lot of money into those homes, pushing the low-income people further into Northland and Eastland and heading into Licking County. And so here we have the map of infant mortality. The areas outlined in black have some of the infant mortality rates that look like developing nations. Here we have that opportunity map. The brighter the color of red, the greater the opportunity. Each dot is where either the shooter or the victim was a youth. In 2020, the median age of a gunshot victim fell from like 35 to 22 years old, meaning half of all people experiencing gun violence are now youth in this community. Here is the map from Legal Aid Society, is a heat map. Most of this is evictions, Linden, the Near East Side, south of Children's Hospital, Hilltop. Here we have where people lived right before they went to jail. It is the same map. And now we have food pantry use mapped by Mid-Ohio Food Bank. Also looks very similar, that reverse L. And it ends in this. This is the Franklin County life expectancy map. If you live in the area of bright blue, you will live 20 years longer than the areas in red. That is not one issue. It's infant mortality, it's chronic disease management, it's food insecurity, it's domestic violence, it's community violence. I have lived in an area of red for 32 years. I don't worry about my life expectancy. I'm a visitor in this neighborhood. Because I grew up in the area of high blue, my trajectory was set very early in life. I've now committed myself to taking the gifts that I have been given to try to work to dismantle and provide equity. The reality is, in the book, The Color of Law, which talks about the whole organization of US cities, that we've created this caste system with African Americans continuing to get exploited and geographically separate. And that was based in those government policies. And the reality is these policies are off the books, but they've never really been remedied, and their effects endure. Linden and the area of South Side has very different outcomes than Upper Arlington. The barriers got removed, the outcomes are the same. And while we might theoretically agree that society is unequal and unfair, the reality is when we are asked the question to desegregate our own city or our own neighborhood, or to provide affordable housing where we live in a high opportunity neighborhood, people are often frozen with inaction. So I would encourage all of you to just continue on the journey of self-discovery and the recognition that the injustices of today are very layered and they're very complex. And if we're not working to be an anti-racist, we are continuing the inequity. Thank you.
Whew.
That's a lot.
I know, Jenny and I are like, I
know
trying to take all that in.
It's exhausting.
It's also exhilarating, Michael. To have that information is empowering. And what started to happen in the chat, Betty Lou wanted to know, where is the hope? And we started a little bit of brainstorming about that. Do you want to take a stab at that question? Where's the hope? What now?
Yeah. So I've got a couple quick things. And, if you gave me 3 hours, I'd do the next 90 minutes on the hope. I have several reasons for hope, right? I think that over this last year, so many of us have said, oh my goodness, I had no idea. And people are willing to hear this information and not be put off by it, right? So I have hope that people like you, and even the people that we fund at United Way, there is a recognition that, wow, I had no idea, right? I mean, I did this presentation for Upper Arlington Rotary, right? And they were willing to hear it. Okay, so that's just this whole willingness of discovery. That's number one. Number two, in September of last year, Bexley passed a source of income protection law, which now says a landlord cannot deny somebody housing because they have alimony or child support or Social Security disability, or they have a Section 8 voucher. If they have legal income, they must be accepted, right? Because landlords all across the country can deny people based on their source of income. Bexley had the courage. And by the way, there were only, I believe, only 6 cities in America that had a source of it. I'm sorry, 6 in Ohio and like 150 in America that had passed these source of income laws. Well, guess what? Columbus passed it, so did Reynoldsburg, and so did Westerville, right? So, I mean, in very quick succession, communities are saying, no, if people have this legitimate source of income, they must be accepted. There are other examples in Shaker Heights, Ohio, which is very much like a Bexley, a high income community. The Gunn Foundation and the Cleveland Foundation was providing financial incentives to basically provide subsidies so people of color could move into predominantly white areas, and areas in University, I think it was University Heights, and other places that were maybe becoming predominantly places of color. They were providing incentives for white folks to not leave as there was racial change in that community. So, you know, we can look at philanthropic and government sources to say living in a mixed race, mixed income community has great value. Columbus banks and philanthropic institutions just created a $100 million affordable housing fund that will kind of instigate and incubate more affordable housing production in the marketplace. Franklin County commissioners, you have something called the conveyance fee, and you can do by law up to $3 per, I think it's $1,000 in valuation of home sale or something like that. Within the last year, Franklin County commissioners approved an additional $1 on the conveyance fee. That additional $1 is going to incubate affordable housing. So that's $7 million a year that Franklin County is now putting into a fund. So there are tools about, you know, faith organizations like yours going on a journey, encouraging people to read White Fragility and How to Be an Anti-Racist. That's really important. And we, as a faith community, can be testifying at city councils in Marysville and in Delaware and in Dublin and in UA, if you live in those communities, to say, I'm a person of faith and I believe my community should have a source of income protection, just like Gahanna and Westerville and Bexley and Columbus, because people's source of income should be protected. So there's all kinds of like tools like this that are growing. You look at Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission, and I can send these tools in a follow-up, has a regional housing plan. It has 117 different recommendations on how to create a more just housing environment. Any of you, please testify when somebody wants to build housing in your neighborhood or your community that high density housing is important. Apartments are important. In my neighborhood, everybody is supporting people who want to build detached garages and put apartments above that garage. It is a really easy way for 2 things: a homeowner to generate revenue and to build a affordable rental unit. 3 people in my neighborhood. The Civic Association supports what's called an accessory dwelling unit. The area commission supports it. The city staff support it. You need to get 9 variances if you want to build an apartment unit above a garage in the city of Columbus. You need to take a look at your local zoning codes to say, yes, I think it's important to have 5-story apartment buildings and they can be micro units, and we can underpark these buildings in the core of Marysville and Delaware and on High Street. And if people want to do an accessory dwelling unit, you know, in these examples, they wanted to have a parent, they were young families, they wanted to have their mother or father live in the apartment above the garage to provide childcare. And so you had 3 generations of a family living in the house. Our zoning code makes that illegal. So there's all kinds of things like that that I'm hopeful that we're starting to examine everything through a social justice and race equity lens.
Great. Wow. So what I typed in the chat, it sounds to me housing is a big, huge issue. And I think early, you know, getting kids early childhood intervention opportunities, so they're not 1.5 years behind early. You know, I know a lot of people want to, you know, jump in and do something. So hopefully this has generated some thought for you to take back to your home churches. Maybe you have some ideas you'd like our presbytery to tackle on. Our commission, welcomes those questions.
Bob Hines put a question in the chat about how to get Black households to build wealth, if not through home ownership. The City of Columbus recently published a economic opportunity blueprint that provides examples of that. And there's also Franklin County commissioners also created a Franklin County poverty blueprint that also has lots of recommendations across broad categories. I'll send those links rather than me trying to, we're near our time. I took up all that time with my slide deck. I can send those reports out. And for those of you that are interested in that economic opportunity report or the Franklin County poverty blueprint or MORPS's regional housing strategy, what's really important about these recently published documents, they provide very tactical ways to answer questions about housing equity and income equity and building an economic pipeline for marginalized groups that will be of great value to you. And as you continue on this discovery, what's great about Zoom, it's very easy to organize a meeting where folks can come. And I can also recommend to Katie and Jenny, a couple people that represent those documents that could come and share with you, hey, it doesn't matter if you live in a rural township or you live outside Franklin County or you live in Dublin. Here's the person from the regional housing strategy that can give you very tactical ways to look at housing equity, or the person, Karina, from the city, who can give you very tactical ways in which how maybe the faith community can work to build wealth for marginalized groups. You have an incredible power because you're a faith community, that it provides you the other way I can say it is it provides you a moral compass to come to the conversation with love and empathy, and to give elected officials the courage to move in the right direction because you're giving them the support to do so.
Thank you, Michael. And this Matthew 25 initiative, whether your church chooses to be a Matthew 25 church or not, this call to look at structural racism and systemic poverty and to be vital in the world, looking at these and other issues to bring justice back to all of us. Those things are all part of our commitment now. And so you will get these resources that Michael's talking about. They'll be on the PSV website under Matthew 25. There'll be some of them on that YouTube channel. We'll post things on the Presbytery Facebook page. Please keep asking your questions and giving us their ideas. Michael's given us a whole bunch of workshops to do right now, and we are really, really grateful. There is so much we can do when we put all of our knowledge and passion together.
So, well, it is 11:32, and so it is a beautiful Saturday. So let us close with a word of prayer. Loving God, thank you for this day and this opportunity to learn and grow and to be challenged. We have high hope in you. We have faith in you that you will guide us to programs and people and leadership to tackle these big, big issues in front of us. We pray that all of this in your loving name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you, Michael. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you very much for organizing this. Thank you.
Our pleasure.
I didn't know, Katie, if you want to stay on for just a minute.
Yeah, let me stop the recording.
Okay.